Welcome, Sachidasa. Thank you for getting together with us and telling us a bit about your new book that you've just released, The Sound of One Hand. Sachidasa lives at near the London Buddhist Centre. He's been ordained for a bit over 10 years. And the book, which we have copies of, is available. Very funny read, very honest and very funny, well worth checking out. I wanted to start by asking you, Sachidasa, if you could tell us a bit about your life around the London Buddhist Centre.
Yeah, I live in a little flat nearby the London Buddhist Centre. That's in East London, which is a bit like you. So we were talking earlier. You're saying sort of trendy part of town. There's the Buddhist Centre there. It's been there since 1978. I know you've been there. I've been there with you before. And yeah, I live with my wife, Joanna, just around the corner, and we've just adopted a little boy who's 4 years old. In fact, we haven't actually, he's going to be adopted by us next week, or by the court officially, but we've had him for 6 months. Thomas, lovely little boy. And I'm a trustee at the London Buddhist Centre, so I go there a lot, you know, and I help out and do classes and things. Yeah.
And what about outside of the centre too? You work as a lawyer.
Yeah, I'm a non-practicing solicitor. Yeah, I'm a non-practicing solicitor, so I do sort of some work that I can do, legal work, wills and a bit of probate and a bit of this and that, and helping out around Sangha, various, you know, charities that we have. I get asked to do some things, and I teach boys at a school, public school called Eton, which you may have heard of. I teach Buddhism there. I will actually take a faith class on a Sunday at Eton. It's a famous public school, famous for all the wrong reasons. Well, probably the right reasons, yeah. It took me ages to write it. I mean, I had to learn to write. I had to learn to write in a way which was going to be easily read. So we all have stories about our lives, don't we, that are in our minds, or maybe we've tried to write about them, but actually to really show your life and let it be seen by others is quite difficult. And it took me a long time, years actually, to learn to do it properly and to really yeah, just get into the writing. But I found it a very beautiful thing to do. I would highly recommend writing as a creative thing where you get to reflect on your life and you get to see how, you know, we're always telling ourselves stories about our lives, you know, and you can it becomes a practice whereby you see that you're creating a story about your life, and that's a positive thing. And yeah, it did help me come sort of rethink and see what was really important about my life to write about it for so long.
Is there anything that you wrote about that surprised people? I know a lot of people around the LBC and other parts have been reading it and giving feedback, like
yeah,
things that have surprised people.
About me, or about what? Did anything surprise you, can I ask?
I think that you've just touched on the one thing that I noticed most. I don't remember you sort of commenting on your hand much, and sort of like, yeah, it was sort of always a bit of a kind of non-event. I remember sort of it bothered you that you couldn't cut onions really, really neatly, like people that would like grasp the whole onion and have it like just perfectly fall. But apart from that, you made it out like it was just nothing.
Yeah.
So I was,
right.
I was sort of surprised and yeah, a bit disappointed to hear about it as a child, like in this, you know, at school and stuff.
Yes.
I don't know if you'd describe it as bullying, but certainly it did, you know, impact you.
Yes. Yeah, it was bullying. I suppose, yeah, that's interesting. Like the idea, so you can cut onions, can't you? And you can cut them really neatly and so that they all go into tiny little cubes and they all sizzle away in the pan really nicely. But you can cut an onion with one hand, it just doesn't look as good. So I guess that would have been my attitude, like, oh, you just get on and, you know, like when you try to open a jar, I think I mentioned this in the book a couple of times, you open a jam jar and you clasp it to yourself and get jam all over your shirt. There's certain things that are a bit of a pain, but you think, oh well, in the scheme of things, that's not a big deal. But I remember when I was 29, and I mentioned this in the book, I'd been practicing Buddhism, maybe for 9 years or something like that. Done a lot of meditation, a lot of retreats. I got on the tube one day, we call that the underground in London, and this guy gets on. He's probably about my age, and he's working in the city, and he had a similar thing to me, and I rarely met people with that, and I just felt really uncomfortable because I just didn't want to talk to him about it. I didn't want to acknowledge it. I realized there was a whole unexplored thing there that it's a continual sense of being different and it being visible that affects one's mind. And what do people think about it, and how do I explain it to people? And I guess I'd built a kind of a world where it was like, look at the good shiny bits of me, look how good I am at this and that, and I'm academic and I succeed in these various ways. Look at them, don't look at this. So I had to. I ended up deliberately looking into that, and as I sort of, I mentioned this in the book, going on a kind of a week-long event with children who had a similar disability. There were about 40 children and about 10 adult helpers. Nobody had more than one hand on that event, and it was a very beautiful and opening sort of thing for me to be with people who had similar things. So yeah, it was a journey, and it was a journey that came into my sort of Buddhist journey as at various stages as something that I needed to look into, and it doesn't mean that everything, like I had to explore the question, have I become a Buddhist because I've got this suffering, because this is this dukkha that in my life, and that's what's driven me to become a Buddhist. And I didn't really like that idea. I thought, oh my God, surely I became a Buddhist because I understand the Dharma and blah, blah, blah. I had to accept that there was some truth in that, but not, maybe there's more to it than that, anyway. So that was a bit of a surprise for people. Yeah, my family found it all quite surprising, some of it. It's hard to communicate about your life, isn't it? And then when especially if you're leading a Buddhist life and your family kind of don't understand what you're doing all the time, and then sometimes your family are not so appreciative of what you're doing. Some people's families are. My family were not so interested a lot of the time, but then I didn't, want to share. And then I write this book and they read it all. So, yeah.
It sounds quite English.
Yeah. Don't speak. Yeah, they're very English.
Let's not talk about that.
Let's just publish it later. Dessert was a lemon cake made by someone's mum. Although Bhante looked ordinary, he clearly wasn't. The Buddha described a true monk as someone mindful enough to be aware of what his hands and feet are doing all the time. Bhante didn't flap about like most people. He was bizarre in a neat and normal way. But I didn't agree with the guy who insisted afterwards that Bhante had seen through to his inner being. Bhante had acquired what the guy did for a living. That was all. And what do you do for a living? He asked me. I'm a journalist, I said. I'm going to skip over there. Basically, I explained to Bhante how the day before I'd been at an inquest about a Harrow schoolboy who got drunk on his father's tequila and fell out the window to his death 5 stories below. There were no other journalists in the court, so my copy went to the Daily Telegraph. Oh, yes, I read that, Sente. You read the Daily Telegraph? I asked, astounded. It's a bit of a right-wing paper, by the way. You probably know. I have to say, I did wonder why it was that his parents hadn't gone to the trouble of getting a more secure drinks cabinet, said Bhante. He was spot on. The sub-editor had cut out the coroner's remarks about the parents not putting a lock on the drinks cabinet, given that their son had raided it before. How did Bhante find the time to wade through the Daily Telegraph, let alone remember a story that got a few column inches on page 8? I thought he was supposed to spend the day meditating and running a worldwide Buddhist movement, whatever that entails. I totally trumped the other guys in the community with their operatic taste. While I'd been sitting on the tube that morning reading Bhante, he'd been home reading me. I polished off my lemon cake, trying not to mug. Before he left, he named our community Nava Samaya, which meant new bond. We dedicated our efforts to the happiness of all beings with a short ceremony. I can't remember if it evolved anymore, but it probably did. Afterwards, as Bante stood by a window for a photograph, just a strange white light in the crown of his head, hinting what I was seeing. He moved slightly to reveal the aircraft warning light on the top of Canary Wharf building nearby. I'm reading that. It's interesting. I'm reading there's like kind of a lot of English references in there that I could not necessarily going to know what they are. Yeah, so there's so what there in that I've just tried to sort of describe a thing that happens to so many people that you have this meeting with Bante, you feel a bit awkward, you don't know quite how to behave. Everybody's behaving slightly differently to how they normally did. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think we'll leave it there unless there's anything else that's come to mind.
No, for sure. Thank you for having me, and I hope I hope a few people enjoy the book. I'd love to think of it being read in Australia as well. My main hope is that people, just enjoy it and can relate to it as a story. One of the wonderful things about the memoir as a form is that although it's about a person's life, you really see your own life as you go through it. If somebody can write well enough, that you see into the texture of life and start to reflect on your own life and your own journey. So I hope that it does carry in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think particularly people training for ordination, I think there's a lot in there that people will relate to, just sort of the ups and downs and the doubts and the kind of gratitude, because there's also a sort of deep gratitude for Bante and the order that comes through, which is very delight. So yeah, all the best with all of the other launches, and hopefully we'll see you again for the next book.
Thank you, Reggie Marie.